So if we discovered extraterrestrial intelligences, I assume you agree with me, they're not here yet, right? But if we do, they will have also discovered Newtonian mechanics and relativity,
yes,
this sort of thing. They won't call it that. But
I think that's one thing you can say. If they get here, then they must be good physicists. And since physical truths are universal, it'll be the same physics as we have, only probably much more advanced. So they will have Newton's laws, they will have relativity, they will have the Pythagoras theorem. So it'll all be... My point was that the only thing we will have in common with them, to converse with them about, to talk about, would be science. I was once at an atheist conference, and a number of people had brought children, and so there were quite a lot of children running around, and they had a play group and things. And at some point, somebody up on the stage said, "All you atheist children, come up on the stage." I hit the roof because I'd just finished criticizing religious people, well, all of us really, for labeling children with the religion of their parents, talking about a Catholic child or a Protestant child, an Anglican child, a Muslim child. And I always satirize it by saying you wouldn't dream of talking about a logical positivist child or an existentialist child. And yet religion is the one thing where we automatically assume that the religious beliefs of the parent will be inherited. And that, I think, is a cycle that needs to be broken.
Hello, everyone. Hi, my name is Robyn Blumner. I direct the Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science. If you'll indulge me for just a few minutes, I'd like to tell you a little bit about what we are and what we do. So the Richard Dawkins Foundation was founded in 2006, soon after publication of The God Delusion. And it occurs to me that there are people in this audience who may be familiar with that book. You know, people asked Richard, why did you establish your foundation in the United States when you're a British citizen? And his answer is, because America needs the help. Which is true even if I can't do a British accent. So in 2016, the Richard Dawkins Foundation merged with the Center for Inquiry, which is a larger organization, also founded by scientists and thinkers, including Carl Sagan, the astronomer, Isaac Asimov, the science fiction writer, and James the Amazing Randi, the magician who famously outed the fraud Uri Geller. So why did we come together? Well, the organizations have exactly the same mission, which is the promotion of reason, science, and secularism. And that's primarily through promoting the separation of church and state, yes, the rights of atheists here and around the world, and the end of pseudoscience, wherever it arises. Yes. So, pseudoscience is nonsense that's dressed up in the garb of science. It's like the entire field of homeopathic medicine, which is snake oil, and if you bought any, you've been ripped off, because water does not have a memory no matter what King Charles says. So what is it that we do precisely? Well, I'm going to start with a little bit of a depressing statistic. If you ask Americans today about evolution, they will say that 37% will say that God put human beings on Earth fully formed within the last 10,000 years, which means that nearly 4 in 10 Americans are dyed-in-the-wool creationists 100 years after the Scopes trial. So what did the Richard Dawkins Foundation do about it? We created the Teacher Institute for Evolutionary Science, or TIES. And TIES teaches teachers how to teach evolution. We give teachers the knowledge, the tools, the confidence to teach evolution and answer its critics. And we've now exposed more than 3,500 teachers across the United States to this program in every state in the union. So it's not just California, New York, Vermont, the places you'd expect. We're in Louisiana, we're in Mississippi, we're in Alabama, we're in Arkansas, we're in places that really make a difference. But we know that scientific illiteracy is not just a problem of the United States. So the Richard Dawkins Foundation launched the Translations Project. We take the books of Richard Dawkins, the evolutionary biology books and the atheism books, we translate them professionally into the languages that are dominant in the Muslim world: Arabic, Urdu, Farsi, Indonesian. We put them up on our website for free download. Tens of thousands of people in Muslim-dominated countries annually access these books. They get exposed to ideas they would not otherwise have access to. We save lives with a program called Secular Rescue. So if you're an atheist activist, you live in Pakistan, Bangladesh, Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, you take your life in your hands. You could be targeted for execution or mob violence. Secular Rescue, as the name suggests, spirits these people into safety. We save dozens of atheist lives every year around the world. And finally, thank you, we do something which shouldn't be hard but isn't. These days, we stand up for scientific truth, even when it offends the woke left. We do. So there are many genders, and everyone is deserving of respect, however they identify themselves. But there are only 2 biological sexes. Sex is a binary. It's just a scientific fact. And you'd be surprised how much trouble we get into these days for saying that. So that's the Richard Dawkins Foundation and the Center for Inquiry. We stand for reason, science, secularism, and we're not woke. So. And now it's my pleasure to introduce you to one of the 2 very impressive men you're going to be hearing from tonight. Michael Shermer is an author of science and secularism books. In fact, his latest book, Conspiracy, is available for sale in the lobby. He's an incredible podcaster, public intellectual, and thinker. Please welcome Michael Shermer.
All right. Thank you, Robyn.
Right.
All right. Nice to see you all. You realize where we are, right? The Masonic Temple, the Masons. I mean, they're right up there with the Illuminati, the Bilderbergers, the Rothschilds, the one world government. I was just talking to Alex Jones today about this. No. The globalists are after us. If that wasn't crazy enough, so today I fly up from Santa Barbara and check into my hotel at this Hilton Union Square. It's this giant hotel. And just as I'm making my way to the elevators, the ballroom doors open up and like 1,000 people are pouring out. And they had that kind of crazed look on their face, that, you know, that kind of Marjorie Taylor Greene look, you know, that somebody had just been sitting in a televangelist And so anyway, on the elevator, I go, so what's this conference? They go, it's a prayer conference. I thought, oh my God, okay, this is too much. Did you just pray all day? And they said, well, not all day. We had speakers. What did they speak about? Prayer. Okay. And then they were so enthusiastic, I missed the floor for my room. And they said, is there anything you want us to pray about? I go, yeah, get me back to my floor. Okay. So that was the start of my day. I think instead of reading the potted biography of Richard, you kind of know who he is and what his books are. Many of you brought them here. I thought I'd just tell you just a very short story. About a year ago, my graduate advisor, Doug Navrick, died. He's about 75, so it was completely unexpected. But at the memorial service for him, each of us got up to say something, and I was to go last. His colleagues, ex-graduate students, and so on. And it occurred to me, and I got up and said, did any of us ever tell Doug these wonderful things we're saying about him when he was, alive, to appreciate it? And it turns out, no. So I thought, since Richard himself has said, this is my final bow, this is the last lecture, how about we really show him how much we appreciate all of his work for all these decades. Richard Dawkins. Wow. Richard, nice to see you. You have 2 more talks on this tour, and then you go to Europe, so we are grateful for your presence here. I thought I would remind you of a story. In August of 2001, a month before you know what, you and I appeared at this conference for the future. This was the Arthur Kessler, the Kessler Prize, remember, in Seattle. And the theme of the conference was the future of humanity. This is August of 2001. Guess what none of all these eggheads anticipated, right? And by way of introducing your new book and your work here, one of the things I noticed about Richard's appearance, there was maybe, 40, 50 scientists, philosophers, scholars. These are all, most of the people you would know who they are. And the conversation would ricochet around the room, and Richard would just sit there quietly listening. And then he would say something, and then the entire conversation went off in a different direction based on what you said. One of the themes was conscious evolution, fantasy or fact. So all of us gave our uninformed opinions about this, and then Richard said, I wanted to listen around the table to see if I could make out what conscious evolution is. I still haven't. It's great. It seems to be a mix-up of 2, 3, or 4 very different things. There's the evolution of consciousness. There is what Julian Huxley would have called consciousness of evolution, or the way he put it was man is evolution become conscious of itself. But entirely separate, mind you, he's just doing this off the top of his head, right? I had to write all this down. But entirely separate from that, forget about consciousness and just talk about deliberate control of evolution. Then we bifurcate again into 2 entirely different kinds of evolution. That is genetic evolution and cultural evolution. I'm not going to utter the M word, memes. Everybody else keeps saying it and then looking at me, and I'm going to duck out of that. I used to not think this, but I'm increasingly thinking that nothing but confusion arises from confounding genetic evolution with cultural evolution, unless you're very careful about what you're going to do and don't talk about as though it was somehow just different aspects of the same phenomenon. Anyway, the point is that after that, the entire conversation shifted to everything you said, and that would be an example. So why is it that people can't seem to just accept just good old Darwinian natural selection? They always have to have some twist on it. It's conscious, or it's directional, or it's multi-level, or it's group selection, or it's punctuated equilibrium. There's all these alternatives. What is the...
Could it be that, by the way, I have a cold, I have to apologize for this. Could it be that there's a kind of ambition to do Darwin down, to sort of go one better than Darwin. Darwin, as Michael Gieselin said, was working 100 years ahead of his time. And I don't have very much time for people who say that they've overthrown Darwin or they've revolutionized him or they've come up with a new version of Darwinism or something like that. It's still pretty much the way he said, plus the neo-Darwinian revolution of the 1930s, which was initiated by Ronald Fisher and J.B.S. Haldane and Sewell Wright. Ronald Fisher, by the way, has been cancelled in his old college in Cambridge, which is very sad.
Why?
He's thought to be a eugenicist, which he was. Everyone was in those days.
Right. Well, maybe you want to just make a comment about that. Applying modern standards and moral values and norms that we just developed, last week, and then applying them to somebody who lived in the 19th century.
Well, it's even worse when it's the 18th century. David Hume, for example, is being cancelled in his native city of Edinburgh. David Hume, the great philosopher of the Scottish Enlightenment. Yeah.
What did he do? Well,
I think he said something dubious about slaves or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Once again, in the 18th century, that's what people said.
Right. It's like you can find quotes from Jefferson, Lincoln, Franklin, all of them back then, the founding fathers, about their belief that there's racial differences in intelligence and humanity and so on. But almost everybody believed that.
Well, we move on. I've called it the shifting moral zeitgeist, and it's a very fascinating phenomenon that as the decades go by, the standards of moral judgments are moving in a progressive direction, and it's not possible. It's a little bit like Moore's law, which about computer power, which follows a very accurate mathematical curve. But it's not due to any one thing. It seems to be a summation of various different things. And I think that's the same with the shifting moral zeitgeist. It's a combination of dinner party conversations, journalism, parliamentary debates, legal decisions, that kind of thing. And they all conspire together to move us on decade by decade by decade. If you look at the fiction of the early 20th century, the 1920s, you see the most shocking racism by today's standards. It just was normal, and things have changed, things move on in this rather mysterious way. It's a bit like something in the air, but that's not very helpful, but it's something like that.
I think there's directionality to it in a sense that we're moving toward treating people as honorary members of our tribe and trying to overcome some of those evolved tribal propensities towards xenophobia that you write about initially in The Selfish Gene, which you said people mistakenly read by title only. I mean, being generous and helpful and nice to other people can actually be a selfish thing.
What we should be thinking about is what people 100 years from now will be look back at us and look at our moral standards and what are we doing wrong now that they will think is the norm.
Meat eating, maybe?
That's the kind of thing I'm thinking of, yes.
I know, but I like meat.
Yes.
It's a problem.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, before I want to go further down that pathway and talk about universal truths and what the aliens would discover, because you wrote an essay about that. But let's first just tag your book here. So when I read The Genetic Book of the Dead, by the way, it's beautifully illustrated and produced by Richard's co-author on this, Yana, who did these beautiful illustrations, almost every page. My sense was it's a little bit of a bookend with The Selfish Gene, and I was re-listening to The Blind Watchmaker last week, and you mentioned this phrase, The Genetic Book of the Dead, even back in the 80s.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I had completely forgotten that. Did it mean the same thing?
I think so. I mean, I don't know, because you just kind of threw it out there.
I'll have to look it up.
We're doing an archaeology of Dawkins' work here.
Yeah.
But what do you mean by it? And how does this kind of complete the circle there?
Yes, I like the phrase bookend. I think that's good. I call the subtitle is A Darwinian Reverie. The thesis is that the animal, any animal, including us, is a book, a work of literature, which describes the ancestral worlds which led to its being the way it is, because this was done by natural selection of its ancestors. There's a quote from Darwin. Can I just find that quote, which I find rather inspiring? Darwin wrote in The Origin of Species, "It may be said that natural selection is daily and hourly scrutinizing throughout the world every variation, even the slightest, rejecting that which is bad, preserving and adding up all that is good, silently and insensibly working whenever and wherever opportunity offers." I think that although we can't read them yet, animals, plants contain signals from the past which can be read with sufficient technology which we don't yet have, but in the future, the genome of an animal and the anatomy, the physiology, the biochemistry of an animal will be read as a written description of the succession of worlds in which its ancestors survived to pass on the genes that make the animal that we see today. The Book of the Dead, the genetic Book of the Dead, must be a palimpsest. Palimpsest is a manuscript which, in the days before they had paper and papyrus and things were scarce, they would erase what was written or partially erase it and write over it, and then partially erase it and write over it again. So the genetic Book of the Dead is a palimpsest in the sense that it's very ancient writing from ancient selection pressures, partially overwritten by more recent writings, and then more recent writings still, etc.
Here's what you write. Well, you quote Sir Darcy Thompson, "Everything is the way it is because it got that way," which sounds like a deepity, but it's actually deep. And here's what you say about that. "The genome of every individual is a sample of the gene pool of the species. The gene pool got to be the way it is over many generations, partly through random drift, but more pertinently through the process of non-random sculpture. The sculptor is natural selection, carving and whittling the gene pool until it and the bodies that are its outward and visible manifestation are the way they are."
Yes. It is the gene pool which is subject to the chisels of natural selection, the sculptor. It's the gene pool. The individual animal is a sample from that gene pool. I could illustrate the idea of the genetic Book of the Dead with a lizard. I put it right at the beginning of the book. It's a lizard from the Mojave Desert. And it has a desert painted all over its back. It's got little stones and sand, a beautiful image of desert, which of course is, might so beautifully camouflaged. And my thesis is that this is merely the surface, and it's more than skin deep. The same chisels of natural selection which led to the lizard having a beautiful painting of a lizard on its back must pervade the entire animal right the way through every bit of the animal. There's no reason why natural selection should stop at the skin. The same thing is going to be true of every little detail within the animal itself, including its physiology, its biochemistry, its cells and all.
How do you deal with mimicry in that model? Animals that look like, say, the desert lizard, but only because they want to look like that to avoid predators or something like that.
Yes, well, mimicry is a fascinating thing. I was just over in Berkeley today, a nostalgic visit because I spent 2 years of my early career there. And there was a beautiful display of butterflies, and including a butterfly with a magnificent simulation of a dead leaf. Just beautiful, exactly like a dead leaf, the right shape, the right color, with a vein up the middle and side veins just where they should be. Every single detail of the resemblance to a dead leaf is there. So natural selection really is a fine-fingered sculptor chiseling away at every last detail. It's a bit of a puzzle how the first step of this mimetic resemblance came about. It's all very well to say that the natural selection produced the final perfection, but then how did it get started when the ancestors of the butterfly only looked a very little bit like a dead leaf, hardly like a dead leaf at all? How can you, on the one hand, say that natural selection produces the final perfection, the end of the process, and also produces the first stages? And I think the answer is that there's a great variety of seeing conditions. In the early stages, the natural selection pressure would have been provided in a poor light, or with predators looking out of the corner of their eye and not looking full frontal, or when they're not really paying attention, or when it's nearly dusk. So that would have provided the selection pressure for the early stages of the mimetic evolution towards looking like a dead leaf. And then the final stages would have been provided by seeing conditions which were good. A good light, full frontal, right in front of the predator. And there would have been a gradient of seeing conditions all the way up from poor to excellent.
So this is the 1% is better than 0% and 2% is better than 1.
That's right. It's one of the problems that creationists constantly bring up. What is the use of half a wing? What is the use of half an eye? What is the use of half a resemblance to a dead leaf? And the answer is that half is better than 49%, and 49% is better than 48%, and 1% is better than 0%, and 100% is better than 99%. So every stage, there's a gradient of improvement.
Yeah. You once said, that might have been in the Blind Watchmaker, no Homo erectus mother ever gave birth to a Homo sapien child or something like that.
Yes. This is a sort of misunderstanding, I think, that people have. You sometimes hear creationists say, well, I'll believe in evolution when I see a monkey give birth to a human. What did you just say?
Well, I mean, if we had, let's say, by some miracle, and it would be a miracle, we had every fossil hominid ever,
right.
there'd be no species.
That's right. If every fossil if every animal that ever lived was fossilized, and we had a complete fossil record of everything, as you say, there'd be no distinction between species. It would be just a continuum with spurts of rapid evolution and then less rapid. But you couldn't classify animals into separate species because there'd be intermediates all the way around. It's very fortunate in a way for taxonomists that most of the animals that have ever lived have gone extinct. If they hadn't, you couldn't divide animals into.
But this suggests that the species concept is something of a social construction in the minds of biologists and paleontologists.
That's right. I think that's fair. And the way you put it originally was no Homo erectus mother ever gave birth to Homo sapiens. As you go back, if you could imagine following your ancestors back, if we could parade them, a great big long line of people disappearing into the past, your mother, your grandmother, your great-grandmother, etc. You walk along the line, you wouldn't perceive any consistent change. It would be, eventually you'd get to Homo erectus. Before that, even further into the past, you'd get to Australopithecus. But there never would be a dividing line. There never would be a point where you'd say, aha, this is the first Homo sapiens and the last Homo erectus. It's not like that. It was every animal that's ever lived belonged to the same species as its parents and its children. But yet, if you go back sufficiently far, you'll come to an ancestor which is a fish.
Now, That reminds me of what I call the fossil fallacy in dealing with creationists, where they say, just show me one transitional fossil. So I was debating Dwayne Gish one night, and he did this. And this was the week that Ambulocetus natans was published in Science. This is the transition between land mammals and whales. It was a beautiful transition. So, this was the analogy I used. So, there's the land mammal, and here's the marine mammal today. And I said, look, there's the Ambulocetus natans. And Gish. So by your analogy, then, there would just be an infinite number of gaps, and they would never be satisfied. So it's a non-falsifiable concept. But on the other hand, Ernst Mayr famously defined a species as a group of actually or potentially interbreeding natural populations, reproductively isolated from other such populations. So when species branch off, say they end up on an island and they're separated by 1 million years, if you get them back together, they can't interbreed. So that's not just a social construct. They really are a different species.
That's right. But if the intermediates back in time were still with us, then they would be interbreeding all the way. This line of creatures going from us to fish, they could interbreed with their neighbors all the way back. There never would come a point where you couldn't interbreed with the previous generation.
Yeah.
And yet here we are, and there are the fish, and we're linked by a continuous chain of intermediates.
There's this kind of cognitive propensity to see progress in the fossil record, as if each is trying to become this more bigger brains or faster runners, or of course they're not trying to do anything. They're just well adapted for what they do.
That's right.
But why is it that we see it that way, in a kind of a progressive, directional way?
Well, I think it's partly because we dignify humans as being the top of the tree, and so they're all struggling to become human. I mean, that's the most naive version of it. I think I do believe in progress, but on the short term. There will be, if you think about the difference between the vertebrate eye and what must be its original ancestor, there's got to be progress there. The present eye is a beautiful device, works like a camera. It's beautifully designed with certain flaws, but beautifully designed to form a real image. There has to have been progress in an improving direction from the start, which would have been just a light-sensitive spot, I suppose. So there always will be progress, but it's not a giant progression starting in the Precambrian and ending now. It's lots of little progressions, and then restarting, and then restarting, and restarting.
One of your famous papers was on the evolution of evolution, I think it was called, right? The evolution of evolvability.
Yes.
What did you mean by that?
Well, I think that although I'm a fairly orthodox Darwinian in the sense that I think that natural selection of individuals within a species is what it's all about. However, there are certain major innovations. I think, for example, of the origin of segmentation. Both the vertebrate body plan and the arthropod body plan and the annelid worm body plan is segmented. You have a series of think of a millipede or a centipede, where it's kind of built like a train it's got a head at one end and a tail at the other end, but the intermediates are just a whole lot of segments, each having a limb and having a repeated succession of organs. Well, segmentation is a new innovation, a new kind of embryology, which must have been invented at some point in evolution by a non-segmented ancestor. And I don't think it's necessarily the case that the first segmented animal, the first, say, worm that had 2 segments rather than 1, was a more successful worm than its 1 segment or no segment parent. But it was evolvable. It provided a new opportunity for a flowering, a radiation, a flowering of new evolution. And so that's what I mean by evolution of evolvability. Every now and again, very rarely, a new innovation, a new embryological innovation arises, which opens the floodgates to a whole flowering of new evolution, and segmentation is one example.
Yeah. This summer, I was at this conference in Florence, Italy, sponsored by Peter Thiel, which was interesting. It turns out he's pretty religious, and he just invited me to come talk about UFOs. Okay, whatever, that's fine. But it turns out most of the people there were kind of intelligent design creationists. They were arguing...
Not very intelligent, therefore.
Not very intelligent, yeah. Yeah, maybe. In a different way. I think they use their intelligence in directional ways that cause problems. Anyway, several of the talks went on and on about like the Bau plan, this German word, like this body plan.
Yes.
And they seem to think like every once in a while, the deity or the designer has to step in and stir the particles somehow because you can't get this whole new body plan.
Yes.
How do you counter that kind of argument?
Well, my example of the invention of segmentation is a very good example of a Bau plan in innovation. Yes, they think that major steps in evolution required the intervention of God. They accept that evolution goes on from Bau plan to Bau plan, but that when a new one is invented, then God has to step in. I don't think it's like that. I mean, obviously I don't. I think that...
Yes. I think we know that, yes.
I mean, they often make a big distinction between macroevolution and microevolution, and they say, well, we accept microevolution, but not macroevolution. Macroevolution is really just microevolution writ large.
So it's really just back to the problem of missing stages in between that they can't see, so they think that's where the miracle happens.
Yes, because it doesn't happen to be a fossil, or if there is, as you say, they've now got two gaps.
Yes, I kind of pushed them on this, and they end up not having an answer. Namely, how does the deity do it? Like, how does it actually move the particles around to create a new Bau plan?
Yes.
And they're like, well, we're just asking questions at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not sure what they think is very interesting, actually.
Well, the problem is it doesn't lead to anything testable. Like, if you don't say, well, is it the fall of every sparrow, so to speak? That, does the deity intervene in every single pregnancy by every organism ever?
Yeah.
Or does the whole thing kind of run itself? And like at the Precambrian, it needed to step in. And then at the origins of multicellular life, the deity stepped in again.
Yes.
And, language, consciousness, morality,
yes.
That's kind of where they think the big steps are.
I do think these major steps are interesting. I mean, things like the origin of segmentation, the origin of multicellularity, as you say, the origin of the eukaryotic cell. These are major, very rare watershed events, but they're not mystical.
Not mystical, no, but you see some of this with professional scientists like Steve Gould. His final book was on multi-level selection, that your kind of neo-Darwinism is not enough to account for what we see. And not just Gould. There's lots of, there's punctuation, not just punctuated equilibrium, but, saltationism, mutationism, group selection, all these alternatives. Are there anything like that we need from a scientific perspective to explain?
Well, I think that Gould's punctuationism was a confusion of three different things. One was saltation, that is macromutation, a sudden jump, a sudden mutational leap in one generation. That's saltation. The second one is mass extinction, which gives rise to, for example, the extinction of the dinosaurs opened the door to the radiation of mammals. So this looks like a punctuation. And the third one is the only one that's really interesting, which is what Eldridge and Gould, I think, properly contributed, is, you mentioned about speciation when animals get on an island, for example, and then on the island, they evolve in a different direction from the mainland. And then when one of them comes back to the mainland later on in geological time, it's evolved sufficiently different that it's a different species. And so you don't see any intermediates because the intermediates are all on the island. But if you just dig down the fossils in the mainland, what you see is a jump, a punctuation. And that's the main contribution that Eldridge and Gould made. But then Gould got, I think, drunk on the poetic aspect of jumps, jerks. John Turner called this the theory of evolution by jerks.
But their counter to that was yours is evolution by creeps.
Yes, that's what I am. Yeah, that's right. But what Gould saw was a purely poetic resemblance between those three things: macromutation, mass extinction, and the speciation effect. And they're quite different. I mean, they all that they have in common is that they appear as a jump. It's a totally different kind of jump in all three cases.
It certainly got portrayed in the public as rapid evolution, happened really fast.
Yes.
There was even an X-Files episode where they encountered some sort of mutant human, and Scully, or I think it was, or maybe Mulder, explained it. That's punctuated equilibrium.
Yeah. Yeah.
Again. All right. Well, related to this, you must get these theories of everything, like I get at Skeptic. I've been working on the weekends here, and I've discovered Newton's wrong and Einstein's wrong and Feynman and Hawking, and I'll share the Nobel Prize with you if you help me with the math. You're talking to the wrong guy. I don't do that math. But there seems to be two areas. There's physics, like the big, what is dark energy and dark matter, the origins of the universe, that sort of thing. And then there's evolution. It seems to be the other big one. You must get these. I've been thinking about this, and I have this theory of evolution. What is it that drives people to do this, you think?
I don't get it so much, actually. I know that physicists get it a lot, and perpetual motion machines is another one. Theory of everything, disproving Einstein. I don't think I get that sort of thing so much as creationist, of course, but that's different.
Yeah, my thought is that it's everybody wants to make a mark.
Oh, yes.
And it's like, well, you guys already did all that, so now what? Well, I'm going to overturn that.
Yes, well, you can't blame them. I mean, everyone wants to make a mark. I want to make a mark, don't you? I mean, but,
Yeah, well, you did.
But, well, no, I mean, I would...
All right, let's talk about a paper you have coming out that your team sent me. It's not published yet. Scientific Truth Stands Above Human Feelings and Politics. That's your working title anyway. The subject is universal truth. So if we discovered extraterrestrial intelligences, I assume you agree with me, they're not here yet, right? But if we do, they will have also discovered Newtonian mechanics and relativity,
Yes.
this sort of thing. They won't call it that. But
I think that's one thing you can say. If they get here, then they must be good physicists. And since physical truths are universal, it'll be the same physics as we have, only probably much more advanced. So they will have Newton's laws, they will have relativity, they will have the Pythagoras theorem. So it'll all be... My point was that the only thing we will have in common with them, to converse with them about, to talk about, would be science. So they will revere their Newton, their Heisenberg, their Planck, their Einstein, their Galileo. And I go so far as to think they will also revere their Darwin, because I stick my neck out here. This is not so obvious. They've got to be good physicists to get here, but they don't necessarily have to be Darwinian. I think that life anywhere in the universe must be Darwinian life. In the broad sense, it must be the result of non-random survival of some kind of replicating information. Probably not DNA, but something analogous to that. Science will be the universal language that we can communicate in, and they will not be interested in sociology or anthropology or whatever the fashionable things are going on.
well, here's what you wrote. Unlike gender studies, media studies, women's studies, black studies, white studies, Mickey Mouse studies, science is not parochial or ephemeral, not limited to one dot in the universe, one species, or one meager span of history. Moreover, science advances as the centuries, decades, years, weeks go by in ways that cannot be said of theology, philosophy, sociology, or I think any other academic discipline. Now, you sure you want to throw philosophy in there? You want to get in trouble with some of the philosophers?
I do get into trouble. I'm genuinely admiring of many philosophers. I don't quite understand what philosophy is, because it seems to me to be clear, logical thinking, and isn't that what we all do, or try to do anyway? I mean, if we didn't think clearly and logically, we'd be lousy scientists. So I don't quite understand what a knowledge of the history of philosophy per se does for you, but I'm really, really eager to be enlightened on that.
Well, one way to think about it is that science is a branch of philosophy. That is, before, let's say, in Newton's time, he was a natural philosopher.
That's right.
There was no science.
Yes, yeah. That is true. I mean, the philosophy that I find helpful and interesting is the kind of thought experiments. Well, moral philosophy, I think, is very valuable, where philosophers like Peter Singer think about the logical contradictions that you might hold if you hold this moral position and that one, because they're incompatible, that kind of thing. But also the thought experiments that people like Derek Parfit and Daniel Dennett do, where it's things like, if you could reproduce yourself atom by atom, literally make an exact copy of yourself, so there were two of you, every single atom was duplicated, which one would be you? Which would you both share the same consciousness? That's the kind of, although it's obviously completely impractical, thinking along those hypothetical lines, I think, is a valuable thing to do, and that's one of the things that philosophers do.
I think Dan Dennett's a good model of this, of doing both empirical science and rationality. They're integrated. I don't think you can separate them. There's no reason to downgrade philosophy. It has made some progress. If you look at the bigger picture, I think since maybe Newton's time, Hume, Kant, all these. I mean, there's a reason we have, basically 4 moral philosophy systems in place. Aristotle's virtue ethics, Kant's, deontological ethics and utilitarianism, and then Rawls's justice theory, roughly speaking, 4 of those. And why don't we have more? And it could be that we have discovered actual moral ways of reasoning that are really out there.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I granted moral philosophy as being clearly valuable. But why do we study Aristotle? I mean,
well, because there's still some relevance to it. That is to say,
but final causes. I mean,
well, not that. Although, I mean, it's a way of entering a subject, I suppose, like reading the history of Darwin. How did he arrive at these ideas?
Yes, a history of ideas. That's great. But I mean.
Okay, I don't want to get you agitated here on that. But I guess I'm after. Here's what I want to see how far you'll go with me on this, and that is, this discovery of principles that are really out there. Let me just read to you from our friend Steven Pinker. He equates moral values with Platonic abstract truths. On this analogy, we are born with a rudimentary concept of number, but as soon as we build on it with formal mathematical reasoning, the nature of mathematical reality forces us to discover some truths and not others. No one who understands the concept of 2, the concept of 4, and the concept of addition can come to any conclusion but that 2 + 2 = 4. Perhaps we are born with a rudimentary moral sense, and as soon as we build on it with moral reasoning, the nature of moral reality forces us to some conclusions, but not others. If I appeal to you to do anything that affects me, to get off my foot or tell me the time or not run me over with your car, then I can't do it in a way that privileges my interest over yours, say retaining my right to run you over with my car, if I want you to take me seriously. Unless I'm galactic overlord, I have to state my case in a way that would force me to treat you in kind. I can't act as if my interests are special just because I'm me and you're not, any more than I can persuade you that the spot I'm standing on is a special place in the universe just because I happen to be standing on it. So that principle of interchangeable perspectives, which I think does derive ultimately from your Selfish Gene work in your very first book, that you make this point about the difference between, say, a rock and another survival machine is that if you kick the rock, nothing happens. If you kick the survival machine, it'll kick you back. Therefore, you have to reason your way into how would that survival machine act if I treated it this way, and I want it to treat me like I would treat them, and so on. So you start in this kind of moral reasoning that may be derived from things that are actually out there in the world.
Yes. Well, I thought that passage you read from Pinker was very good, and I note that Pinker is a scientist, and that's what I kind of mean, that anybody who can think clearly is a good scientist as he is. But you don't actually need to have read Kant.
Well, okay. No, but this is, again, what of the great minds in history thought about these problems? So it helps to know something about the subject.
Yes, I think that, I suppose that's got to be right. What puzzles me is that it took so long for Darwin to come on the scene.
Yes.
And why didn't the great philosophers think of that? I mean, they were confronted by the astonishing fact of living things which are complicated, beautifully designed, evidently purposeful, without any explanation whatsoever, well, except for God. And why was it left for two 19th century traveling naturalists? The idea is simple enough for anybody to have thought of it in their armchair, but none of them did.
Yeah, well, I guess the question is did it take some kind of, cultural milieu to set it up for that? Like both Wallace and Darwin said they read Malthus. So this idea of geometric progression versus arithmetic progression and so on, population growth was becoming an issue in 19th century England and so on.
It is very striking, as you say, that both Darwin and Wallace read Malthus. Darwin said, I happen to read Malthus for amusement, meaning for recreation. And it at once struck me. Wallace was, in a way, more fascinating. Wallace was recovering from a fever, malarial fever. And in one of his lucid moments, he suddenly remembered Malthus and got the idea that I really like the idea that this malarial fever, this overheated brain, coming up with this brilliant idea. But I'm still, it's such a simple idea. I mean, it's not like Einstein. I mean, it's deeply simple. You don't actually need to read Malthus in order to have that idea. You don't need to be a naturalist in order to have that idea. But both Darwin and Wallace were naturalists, traveling naturalists, who spent time in the tropics, marveling at the richness of tropical forests, and both read Malthus.
But also the diversity of life had become apparent by then because of the age of exploration. More specimens to look at, more data that needs explaining versus, say, 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago.
But you just got to look at your own hand.
Well, they did. They saw the sign of design in that.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Paley.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess what I'm after on this particular issue here, and then I won't push it, is this is-ought fallacy. You can't go from an is to an ought. I think this is a pretty thin argument. That's a word philosophers use. It's thin. That is to say, We do this all the time. I mean, where would you rather live, North Korea or South Korea? Well, everybody says, well, South Korea. Why? I mean, is it completely random and culturally bound, and it could change any day now that democracies are better than autocracies? Why are they better? Because people flourish. Who cares about that? And so on. You can kind of reason your way to actual political truths.
Yes. Well, I suppose moral judgments, many people feel they have to be based on some kind of axioms which you just have to accept. Like Sam Harris takes suffering is bad, and then you can derive everything else from that. I suppose I pretty much take that view.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so you have to have a moral starting point somewhere, but even that, can't you derive why do sentient beings not want to suffer from basic biology? I mean, there's a reason our nervous systems makes things so painful. I've heard you talk about this with Pinker. You know, why does pain have to be so damn painful? Why not just like a little red light that goes off?
Yes. I'm very interested in that question, and I think it could have something to do with the fact that if the little red light went on, you could overrule it, because in some senses any animal is a kind of committee of rival drives and purposes and ambitions, and if pain was not so damn painful, but it was just a little red light that went on, you could overrule it.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about one of your other favorite subjects, religion and God. I mean, most of our friends and colleagues are atheists. Most of them don't really care what people think about religion or God or whatever. They're just doing their thing. This has been something that's important to you for most of your adult life. Why is that?
Yes, I mean, I care passionately about it, not for the same reason as Christopher Hitchens, who thought that God was a kind of celestial dictator and religious people lived in a kind of North Korea.
Yes.
My motivation is quite different. I think that the theory that the universe was created by an intelligence is a fascinating theory. It's just wrong. I mean, if it were true, it would be by far the most important scientific idea ever. If there really was a creative intelligence who invented the laws of physics and set the physical constants to be the way they are, then we're living in a totally different kind of universe from if it just evolved. And I think that's the biggest scientific question I could imagine. It is a scientific question, and it's a huge one. And I'm passionately interested in it for that reason, because I think the God hypothesis is false.
But aren't there other reasons? You're concerned about the effects of religion on people's lives or on political conflict?
Yeah, I am, but that's a kind of secondary thing. Yes, that's more of the Christopher Hitchens thing.
Yeah. Well, so you were recently in dialogue with Ayaan Hirsi Ali.
Yes.
Who apparently initially was kind of a cultural Christian, which you said you're a cultural.
I think she was initially a political Christian.
Political Christian.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think she regarded Christianity as a bulwark against Islam. But I think now she's a sincere, believing Christian. Or she says, I choose to believe. I tackled her on particular questions like, do you believe Jesus, I forget exactly what it was. It might have been Jesus rose from the dead or was born of a virgin or something like that. And she said, I choose to believe it.
Yeah.
Which is a strange phraseology, I think. I mean,
it's
either you believe it or you don't. I don't think you can't choose to believe something.
Well, maybe free will would be something like that. If it's an illusion like the determinists think, I choose to believe it. You can't prove that I have free will, but I sure feel like it. And I've never met a determinist who actually believes it.
Yes.
They walk around like everybody else does and make choices.
Yes.
So it might be something like that, a useful fiction.
Yeah, maybe. But I choose to believe that Jesus was born of a virgin. That's a bit different from choosing to believe that you have free will, even though you know you don't. because Jesus being born of a virgin is an actual factual proposition, for which evidence could be obtained if one went back in time.
Let me tell you a funny story about a conference Richard and I, you've heard me tell this story many times. So we're at this conference on science and religion, and Ken Miller was one of the speakers. Ken is a renowned biologist who wrote the definitive debunking book of intelligent design creationism. Their obsession with the bacterial flagellum, for example, and blood clotting in the eye and all that, he just demolishes all that. And at the end of his book, in the last chapter, he says, and oh, by the way, I'm a Catholic, and I accept Jesus as my Savior and the whole thing. And it's like, what? And so we're at this conference, and so this gets teed up for some reason, and Richard said, now let me ask you something, Ken. If we found a piece of the true cross, and on the piece of the true cross there's a little bit of flesh, and we could extract the DNA from Jesus's, body, his flesh, what kind of DNA would it have, because born of a, but anyway, Ken could see where this was going, and he's like, Richard, I'm not claiming any of this is true. I'm just saying I'm a Catholic. This is what we believe. It's like, oh. And it was like,
He said, Richard, there's a reason it's called faith.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, but what do you make of that? I mean, logic-tight compartments, people just separate.
It does seem to be possible for people to hold contradictory beliefs. This baffles me. The most extreme case I know, this story was told me by the professor of astronomy at Oxford. He said he had a colleague in America, an astrophysicist, who writes papers in learned journals of astrophysics, mathematical papers based on the assumption that the universe is 13.8 billion years old, but he privately believes it's only 6,000 years old. Yet he somehow manages to hold down a job as an astrophysicist, writing papers based upon the assumption that it's 13.8 billion years old. I cannot imagine having a divided mind on that scale. We probably...
Yeah. Well, yeah. Let's. A lot of people do on a lot of subjects.
No, but they're not learned in science. I mean, they're just ignorant. I mean, the problem with this astrophysicist is that he knows his stuff.
Yeah.
And he can write mathematical papers about it.
Yeah. Do you want to touch on the subject of trans while we're talking about this? I mean,
okay.
Can men get pregnant? Yes, of course, if by man you mean woman. I mean, how you define these terms seems to be what it comes down to. Biologically, we're not talking about gender, social construct and all that, but just the pure biology. You wrote an essay on this. Yes,
I mean, there aren't many binaries in biology. There aren't many clear distinctions. It's mostly a great smear of spectrum of intermediates. Sex is just about the only one we've got. I mean, there are two sexes and there are no intermediates. And and you can fudge it by using a word like gender, which is a purely psychological thing in which I have no interest. But sex is binary. This goes right the way through the entire animal and plant kingdoms, if you don't count fungi as plants. And it has a very sound evolutionary basis. It's based upon gamete size. There are small gametes, which in our case we call sperms, and large gametes, which we call eggs, and there are no intermediates, again, if you leave out fungi and algae. And this is the basis of the sex difference. It's been shown with mathematical models that isogamy, which means having equal-sized gametes, which together constitute enough nutriment to make a zygote. Isogamy is unstable. it tends to evolve towards anisogamy, which is where you have, on the one hand, evolution towards smaller and smaller gametes, and on the other hand, evolution towards larger and larger ones. And so you have this co-evolution of going small one way and going large the other way. And that's what we've got, the sperm-egg dichotomy. And that is the basis of the sex difference. How sex is actually determined in embryology varies according to what kind of animal you look at. It could be the XXXY system. It could be, or in birds, you probably know it's the other way around. In birds, it's the female sex that's the equivalent of XY. Or it could be temperature, as in many reptiles. It could be social, as in some fish. But that's variable. But what is not variable is this anisogamy, this dichotomy between large gametes and small gametes. So it's simply a brute fact of biology that there are two sexes in all animals and plants.
Let's set aside for a minute the social contagion among teens to identify as trans and just attribute that to social contagion. That's probably going to go away. And set aside the people that want to compete in guys that want to compete in women's sports and all that. What do you make of the edge cases like the XYY, the XYY, and the intersex and all these others? And just people that say, I just feel like I'm in the wrong body. I'm not saying you should do anything. I'm not giving anybody any advice. I just need to live as
yeah. Well, that I mean, the XXY kind of phenomenon, or the X naught, they are nearly always clearly male or clearly female. XXY is if you've got a Y chromosome, then you develop male. But this psychological thing of feeling that you are in the wrong body, that could be a psychological phenomenon. It could be a real thing. I don't know. It could be like anorexia, where you feel, you look in a mirror and you think you're fat when actually you're terribly thin. I could imagine somebody looking in a mirror and thinking, those are the wrong genitals. I shouldn't have that penis. I'm female. And if that is a real psychological condition, then I have sympathy with it. But what I don't have sympathy with is allowing people who identify as the opposite sex, for example, allowing men who identify, now that they identify as female, to enter female sports events and carry off medals.
Yeah.
It may be that they are of female gender. I'm skeptical, but let's allow that. It may be that although they are of male sex, they're of female gender. But it's not their gender that gives them the muscle power to swim faster than a woman. Yes. It's their sex.
Yeah, the Leah Thomas case is, Will. No, sorry.
I mean, I think she's a cheat.
Yeah. I agree. It's a form of doping. Mm-hmm. But again, I know a couple trans. One writes for Skeptic. Another one is Deirdre McCloskey, who's a famous economist who's male to female trans. And they just tell me, this is how I've always felt.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, they're not trying to talk anybody into anything. They're just saying, this is what I got to do to leave.
Well, I've read Elaine, what's she called? Who's the woman who first, I'm blocking on her name. Jan Morris.
Oh, right.
Jan Morris, way back, wrote a book called Conundrum. She had been James Morris and was actually a journalist who was the only journalist on the first successful Everest climbing expedition. And she rather movingly describes in her book Conundrum how she always felt that she was female and eventually went through rigorous, rather arduous hormone treatment and surgery to get rid of male genitalia and so on. And I ended up very sympathetic to her, and I am sympathetic to people who have this gender dysphoria, as it's called. But their psychological gender, as I've said, is not what enables them to, as a boxer, beat the hell out of a woman because they've got longer arms and a stronger punch.
Yeah.
and carry off a gold medal. That's just cheating.
Yeah. Glad to hear that. In 5 minutes, we're going to start our Q&A, and so you're going to, if you line up over on this side, I believe, and the ushers will guide you to where the microphones are, and I will run that show. So while you're doing that, if you want to get up and go over there and formulate your very short question. No theories of everything. Speeches. Last topic I've been toying with in my next book on truth, different kinds of truths. So you and I are in agreement on empirical truths and how to get there through statistical reasoning and rationality and Bayesian reasoning and so on, all the tools of science. But are there other kinds of truths? Let me give an example. Literary truths. So great works of literature, they're just made up stories. The characters are not real. You know, the brothers Karamazov, there were no brothers Karamazov. They're just made up stories. Shakespeare, Jane Austen, whatever. Great literature delivers deeper truths about human nature, human society, conflict, love, jealousy, power, deception, and so on and so forth. Might religious truths be seen as literary truths?
There are apologists who put it that way. And I can see that they might have a point. What annoys me, though, is that they don't distinguish between literary truths and actual truths. I was talking a few days ago, I had a meeting with Jordan Peterson, and I tried to pin him down to say whether he actually believes in the virgin birth, and he refused to answer point blank. But I got the feeling that he probably thinks of it as a literary truth. He is obsessed with the story of Cain and Abel, and this is for him a Jungian archetype, which is a kind of literary truth, I suppose. And the archetype of the jealous brothers and one slaying the other, he seems to blame just about everything that goes wrong with humans on Cain. And at one point, he refers to Cain and Abel as the first humans who were actually born naturally. Now, that's the giveaway, because that means that he's now conflating the literary truth with the actual biological falsehood, because, of course, he knows perfectly well Cain and Abel never existed, although he refused to answer my question, whether they...
I've tried to get it out of him, too. What do you mean by God? What do you mean by believe? What do you mean by the? Yeah. And round and round it goes. Here's what I wrote about this, because I want to give, religious truths some value, I guess. Recall that Jesus suggested to his followers that redemption was coming, that the kingdom has come upon you. And especially Luke 17, 20, 21. There I go, repeating biblical passages, where Jesus seems to infer that heaven is a state of mind. Quote, and when he was demanded of the Pharisees when the kingdom of God should come, he answered them and said, the kingdom of God cometh not with observation, neither shall they say, lo here or lo there, for behold, the kingdom of God is within you. In this sense, what is the greatest religious truth in all of Western Christendom? That if you accept Jesus as your Savior, you go to heaven where you'll spend an eternity with God, was never meant to be taken literally. If so, perhaps it illuminates the tantalizing passage in Matthew 16:26, in which Jesus told his disciples, verily I say unto you, there are some standing here which shall not taste of death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Maybe Christians have been misreading passages like this for centuries. Perhaps kingdom to which Jesus refers is the heaven within ourselves, or the heavenly communities we build here on earth. Now, I've floated this idea up in churches and Christian groups, and at this conference, this Peter Thiel conference where all these Christians are. What if it's like a mythical truth, or a Jordan Peterson or a Joseph Campbell kind of mythological truth, not meant to be taken literally? I have to tell you, they're not buying it. They go, oh, no. He really rose from the dead. I said, yes. What if he just kind of mythologically rose from the, oh, no.
Yeah, that's right. Or even those who do believe it's a mythical truth, nevertheless mislead their congregations by talking about it as though it was a literal truth. I can get into. I mean, I understand the literary value of the biblical writing and the musical value of, say, the St. Matthew Passion, where I can actually empathize with this tragic story of the Passion of Jesus. But I don't believe Jesus is the Son of God. I don't believe he rose from the dead or anything like that.
Yeah. Well, that's the problem taking it literally. Then you should have evidence for it. By the way, I invoked Jordan Peterson, and they were not buying that either. They want Jordan to either say he's a Christian and say, I own it, Jesus rose from the dead, literally, or else stop talking about the mythology stuff.
Yes.
It's kind of funny. All right, let's go to our...
But wait a minute, we're supposed to announce that people who are VIP...
Yeah, the VIP. So when we're done with the Q&A, if you're one of the VIP people, just stay in your seats. And then we will escort you to the special room. All right. So let's, again, keep it short. Ask a question. Your voice should rise at the end with the question mark. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for your time today. And continue to share your thoughts. Long-time reader, first-time caller. Harari argues in his book, Nexus, that the AI might play a central role in recording and interpreting human culture and behavior. Given your ideas about reading the genetic history, how do you think AI could serve a similar function in decoding or even influencing future human cultural and evolutionary history?
Great question.
I think it's quite possible that in some distant future, we soft, squishy, wet things will completely have disappeared, and our legacy will be entirely in silico. That might be a great improvement.
Do you think if we encountered aliens, they would be AI, not squishy biological things?
Sorry.
If we encountered extraterrestrial intelligence?
Yes, Martin Rees, the astronomer royal, thinks that if we ever do encounter extraterrestrial beings, again, it will not be the original biological ones, but they're artificial creations that we encounter, because they're likely to last a lot longer than the biological.
Yep. All right.
Thank you.
Next.
Hi, Richard. This is my third time seeing you. I just wanted to ask, as the father of two young children, why do I not have any other better options for education and an atheist education for my two children outside of the mainstream K through 12 or private education, which is predominantly religious or Catholic? Because I'd like to raise my kids in that concept, but it is not available and it doesn't exist.
Well, I'm not familiar with American educational system. I don't know what K even means. But I deeply sympathize with you. I would not, I think, wish to bring up my children as atheists. I'd rather bring them up to think, to ask questions and to form their own conclusions. I was once at an atheist conference, and a number of people had brought children, and so there were quite a lot of children running around, and they had a play group and things. And at some point, somebody up on the stage said, "All you atheist children, come up on the stage." I hit the roof because I'd just finished criticizing religious people, well, all of us really, for labeling children with the religion of their parents, talking about a Catholic child or a Protestant child, an Anglican child, a Muslim child. And I always satirize it by saying you wouldn't dream of talking about a logical positivist child or an existentialist child. And yet religion is the one thing where we automatically assume that the religious beliefs of the parent will be inherited. And that, I think, is a cycle that needs to be broken.
I would advise looking at Montessori schools. I have an 8-year-old son, goes to Montessori. There's no religion there. If you look around, I think you could find it. Yeah. All right, next.
Thank you for the conversation.
Sorry.
I've been an atheist for 30 years, and so I was particularly crestfallen when Ayaan Hirsi Ali announced her conversion. It strikes me as an opportunity for soul searching for atheists. One of the reasons she gave was she said, atheism is just a negative. It doesn't offer you any positive. There's been some casual conversation about moral philosophy tonight, but I think, doesn't her example show that it's not just a casual issue, that offering positive moral guidance from a secular scientific worldview is super important? And what can atheists do in this moment to reflect on this and find out how to offer some distinctive secular morality?
Well, I think you're quite right about morality, and moral philosophy is very important, as we've discussed. But I also think that it's nonsense to say that it's purely negative. I mean, we've got science, we've got a view of the universe, a view of the world, a view of life, which explains why we exist. I mean, that's wonderful. It's a beautiful thing to know why you're here. And we in the 21st century are privileged over our forebears of past centuries who hadn't a clue, or rather had the wrong clue about why they exist. I mean, we are privileged in that respect. It is wonderful.
I recommend humanism, secular humanism or Enlightenment humanism. There are humanist magazines, and it's nothing but these are all the things we do believe in. The atheism thing is really not part of it at all, other than we just don't believe in God. Now, here's all the stuff we do believe.
Yes, that's right.
Like Free Inquiry magazine, part of your foundation,
yes,
your organization.
Good plug.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for everything you do. I understand that evolution is driven by reproduction and the need to survive. But what I'm trying to understand is what drives that need for reproduction, for survival. Is it possible that the process is what it is? Because if it wasn't, we wouldn't be here to ask the question.
That's right. I mean, that's exactly right. There is no drive to survive, except that those that do survive, survive. And the world is full of creatures, actually full of genes, that have survived through countless generations. And it's just that some survive and some don't. And the animals you actually see are the ones that have been programmed by genes to be good at surviving. So they probably do have a psychological drive to survive because that's been built into them by natural selection. But the genes don't. They just some of them survive, some of them don't, and that's it.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys, for being here. Cheers. I think your problem with philosophy is that you want it to have practical lens, and it doesn't. So I think if you understood philosophy, you'd realize it's done for itself. But that aside, I was interested in your comment about Daniel Dent and the clone situation, because you spoke earlier about how evolution is sort of like a book, a story that's told. And I wonder if you could answer, if you were able to clone atoms, wouldn't you disconnect that from the story? Wouldn't that just, rather than creating another you would just destroy yourself?
Wait, clone atom, what, did you understand that?
Did you mean
You said Daniel Denton had a
copy the atoms?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was a thought experiment, which is one of the things philosophers do well. You imagine making a total copy of yourself. Mm-hmm. So it's not like an identical twin, which is very like yourself and has the same genes, but is a different individual. Every single atom, in your brain especially, is duplicated. So presumably, therefore, the clone, the twin, would at least start off having the same thoughts, the same feelings, the same consciousness as his twin. But then I suppose they would start to diverge. But that's the interesting question. Would they? Would they be the same person? Would it matter if one of them died because the other one was still around?
But in your theory about the continuum, doesn't that sort of discount what you're saying about how there wouldn't be an observable break from one state to the next? Wouldn't?
I think you're talking about something quite
way.
different there. That was a different thought experiment where you imagine generations after generations going back, and they'd all be different individuals. They're not clones. They're mothers and daughters and grandmothers and granddaughters. Mm-hmm. So they are different from each other in the same way as mothers and daughters are different from each other. The point is that if you have enough of them, if you go back through enough of them, you never see a divide, you never see a disjunct, but you come back to a fish. That's a different thought experiment.
So would cultural evolution, would mimetics and biological evolution, could they ever exist without each other?
Would ever exist?
Could cultural evolution, earlier you mentioned the difference between cultural and biological evolution. Can they exist without each other?
I didn't get the last word.
Oh, can they exist without each other?
Without each other? Mm-hmm. Well, they can, because most animals don't have culture. I think
but we do.
I know. I think we've got to better move on to the next one.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Cheers.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for being here. I'm 17 and I've found you inspiring for many years now. But often I've had friendly debates with friends who say that everything happens for a reason and they aren't religious or they're agnostic. And I just don't know how to refute this claim because they don't refer to a God, but they just say that everything seems to happen for a reason and that they can battle with what life has given them. But I don't know how to...
But everything happens for a reason is probably true. But I don't understand what that's got to do with God.
Because saying that everything happens for a reason means that like some higher power has destined that upon you, that something is like happened to create some sort of meaning beforehand. But I find that our interpretation of how life, what brings to us is what we make meaning out of that, but they think the other way around.
Yes. Is it perhaps that they're thinking that if something bad happens to you, you deserve it? Is that sort of...
That's my refutation. I say, what about those who have many things wrong to them? Is that happen for a reason? Who determines that?
Well, it happens for a reason, but it's not a design reason. It's just unfortunate.
That's what I think too.
Yeah.
So
Yes,
it's
okay,
random.
good.
Thank you.
There is research on this in cognitive psych studies that people have a very difficult time understanding randomness and chance in life, and that it feels like things that happen with the hindsight bias, oh, that had to happen this way because this, and I ended up here. And they look back and go, oh, look, it's all, determined by some, whatever, higher power or some force of the universe. And the fact that we can't grasp randomness very well.
Yes.
And that, random clusters happen all the time of stuff. My favorite example is the iPod when it was first released. Jobs released the random shuffle feature. And they got complaints from customers that the random shuffle thing isn't working because some songs come up more than others. It's like, that's randomness.
Hello, Richard. It's my first time seeing you. Seeing it was your last tour. Absolutely had to make it. I was listening to your conversation with Chris Williamson recently, and you were talking about Homo erectus and that being, from what I understand, a very important intermediary stage in evolution. Something that I had heard before, an idea, I don't recall where I had heard it from, is that upright posture or erect posture plays a significant role in the evolution of consciousness, or that may be a necessary precursor. Would you be able to elaborate on that idea if you've also...
Well, the evolution of the upright posture in humans is much talked about and much theorized about. Nobody, I think, knows for sure why it happened. But it probably is, as you imply, a very significant step in our mental evolution. It's easy to imagine that freeing up the hands to manipulate things and carry things and do fine-fingered manipulations of things could have been instrumental in pushing the brain in certain directions. So I think that's a perfectly plausible idea, but it's one of several, and there are other ideas about what led to our rising up on our hind legs and the consequences of it.
Would you imagine that it would be very likely that even if there is other ideas, that those other ideas may be reconcilable with this one, and that this may still be able to play a role in it, and that it doesn't necessarily have to?
I would think that, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Excuse me.
Good evening, Mr. Dawkins. So the gaps in scientific knowledge, which theologists and creationists refer to as the the God of the gaps, has been a sort of constant thing that science tries to fill up, trying to explain how thunder is created and so on and so forth. Although science has come a long way, how far do you think science has left to prove to the rest of the world, to the majority of the population, that there is no God of the gaps?
Well, I think it's a very interesting question whether the human brain is capable of grasping everything, and the long-sought theory of everything that physicists are trying to home in on may be beyond the capacity of the human brain. I think it's remarkable that the human brain has got as far as it has. I mean, when you think that we evolved on the African savannah for nothing more than to be good at hunting and gathering and taking shelter for the night and avoiding being eaten by a lion, it's really remarkable that our species, without any genetic change probably, has managed to produce an Einstein, a Stephen Hawking, a Darwin. So who knows what the limit is? Who knows whether there is some fundamental barrier that the human brain can't penetrate beyond?
Thank you.
Hello, very nice to meet you now, but this is specifically on the trans issue that you mentioned. What about a woman who possesses male-like features when described, like say larger muscles or longer arms? What should she, biologically born as a female, be allowed to go into women's sports, even though she has advantage?
If she is a natural-born female who just happens to have very powerful muscles, she probably will win gold medals at the Olympics, and that's fine. That's fair. She is a woman. If you started to say that anybody who's got good muscles is not allowed to compete, you'd be kind of spoiling the object of the exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But where does that put the line of men have biological advantage over women whenever women can have the advantage that men have?
Sorry, there was a crash. I didn't quite hear that.
Mm-hmm. Where does that put the line of men have biological advantage over women whenever women can have that advantage as well?
Well, I think if you pursued that line of thought to its logical conclusion, then you would be, instead of dividing your Olympic events by sex, you would be dividing them by ability. And you'd say, this event is for only those who are very good at it, and then this event is for the next lot down. And you could do things like that. I don't think people will be very interested in watching.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay.
Let me add just something to that. Just think of it as two overlapping bell curves, male and female. Each of the bell curves is going to have great variation, but the overlap is not that big. And the fact that Serena Williams can beat some men in tennis, say professionals, she can't beat the top men. She herself has said, I'd stand no chance. I'd be double-bageled instantly by any of the top 500 men. So, and we don't care about the tiny little overlapping bell curves that she could beat some of the men that aren't that good. We care about the two extremes. We want the best women to compete against other women, the best men to compete against other men. That's just the way to think about it.
Good evening, Dr. Dawkins. It's a privilege to be here. I think there are many questions that I can ask, and I'll ask a rather contrarian take. So the epistemological theory of falsifiability by Karl Popper, that anything that can have a conceivable event, or any scientific theory should have a conceivable event in which it can be falsified. It can be, which cannot have a conceivable event and it cannot be refuted, is non-scientific. So do you accept Popper's definition, that epistemological definition of a scientific theory? Or maybe you think it's a loaded statement, but if you don't, then what would be that conceivable event that would falsify the theory of evolution?
J.B.S. Haldane was asked that, and he said, fossil rabbits in the Precambrian.
Yes.
Popper once actually said that natural selection was not a scientific theory because it was unfalsifiable, but he actually recanted from that. But do you get the point about holding rabbits in the Precambrian? Isn't that a perfectly good falsification?
No idea.
Well,
Just a non-existence?
another what?
A non-existence?
Yes, but no. If fossil rabbits were found in Precambrian strata, then wouldn't that falsify evolution?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, that's fair.
Hello. So we know that one of the more likely candidates for extraterrestrial life would be on planets or moons, and most of them orbit stars, which give off light. That wedded to the fact that eyes, for example, exploit light, and they've evolved on Earth innumerable number of times convergently. Do you think it's a reasonable hypothesis that if we were to discover life outside of Earth, there'd be a sort of cosmic convergent evolution of things like eyes, or even photosynthesizing, or something that exploits light for some sort of effects?
Yes, I didn't hear all of that, but I think you were talking about eyes evolving on other
Yeah, just due to the fact that
Yes, I mean, it seems to me that using light to find a way around is an obviously good trick, and it's evolved many times on this planet. I mean, it's Ernst Mayr and another author estimated that it had evolved independently more than 40 times on this planet. So I think it's a pretty good bet that if there's a planet which is not completely shrouded in fog or something like that, so that you couldn't see, in which case you would expect echolocation to evolve. Yes, I would expect eyes. I would expect there to be certain convergences like that. And I think eyes is a very good example.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Hi, good evening. You spoke a bit earlier about the evolutionary psychologist Steven Pinker, and I'd like to bring up another evolutionary psychologist, Jonathan Haidt, who's written that the human propensity towards both religious belief and religious practice are actually adaptations from natural selection. Even more than that, he believes that adaptation comes from group-level selection in our human ancestors, often mediated through genocide, I suppose. He points out that Darwin held some beliefs that might be described as group-level selection, and I wonder if you've engaged with these and what your thoughts are. Thank you.
Darwin was not keen on group selection. It didn't have a name in those days, but if you actually read Darwin, he's very, very clear that he was talking about selection between individuals within a species, not groups. However, Darwin did lapse from that on one place in The Descent of Man, which is what you're referring to, I think. And he did put forward a form of group selection. It is not impossible that in humans, those who have certain cultural propensities which make them more likely to win battles against rival tribes, that would be a kind of selection. I wouldn't think of that as a Darwinian process, although Darwin himself did. I would think of it as more like ecological succession, more like the victory of the grey squirrel over the red squirrel in Britain, which is not really a Darwinian natural selection process. It's more of an ecological. I mean, the red squirrels are being driven extinct because grey squirrels bring squirrel pox, a disease which they've become immune to because they've evolved immunity in America where they belong, and red squirrels have not. So I think that's the kind of slightly group selection-y kind of thing which is probably true, and I think that Darwin probably meant that in that passage in The Descent of Man.
My name's Danny. I'm from here in San Francisco, proud atheist, and you really inspire me and enlighten me. I really appreciate what you do. And you can probably tell by looking at me, I'm going to ask a little different kind of question. What was it like working with the band Nightwish?
I was approached by this band. I think they're based in Finland, and they came to Oxford, and we went to a studio, and I did some recitation of some of my words, I think some of Shakespeare's words, and then later I was asked if I would go and perform with them in Wembley, a great big stadium in London, and I was a bit scared of this gigantic audience, and everybody had their iPhones or their smartphones. They were just filming the whole thing, and the entire audience, you could see this, every single person had their smartphone up there. And I had to wait till the very end, and I had to recite a passage from Macbeth while they, it was the tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow speech, while they played their music. And it was an amazing experience.
Yeah, they do that live too in concert. When they play that song, they play your narration over the speaker during that song live. And I interviewed the singer Flor Jansen, Reality Check TV on YouTube. Look it up. We interviewed talking to her about that.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah.
Good evening, Dr. Dawkins. I can decide between the two questions. One is more scientific about consciousness, and the other is about a bit more philosophical. Which one would you choose?
Well, the first one.
The first one. Okay. So, given that there was no first human and no single point where consciousness suddenly emerged, would you agree that consciousness exists in all organisms with central nervous system, but in varying degrees?
Good question.
Nobody can know the answer to that. I certainly believe that consciousness didn't suddenly appear with humans. So I'm pretty confident that consciousness is widespread in mammals, probably birds. I don't think I would say it's present in all animals with nervous systems. I don't think it's present in maggots, for example. But of course, one doesn't know. There are people who think that consciousness came first, that atoms are conscious. And I think that's absolute bullshit.
Thank you.
I grew up in Pakistan, and at 16, somehow found your books and became an atheist, and became a bit of a misfit, and my mother still hates you.
I'm really quite nice, you can tell her that.
My question actually stole a little bit of my thunder, but I was going to ask you about consciousness as well in terms of the hard problem of consciousness. I think I heard you say at one point that you still didn't understand what purpose being conscious served in evolution, and it seems like you're not a panpsychist. So just on that.
I think if I knew what consciousness was and what it was for, I would win a Nobel Prize. I don't have an answer to the hard problem. There are some philosophers, for example, Colin McGinn, who thinks that it is unanswerable and never will be answered. Dan Dennett thought he had answered it. I'm not even sure. I mean, to me, it's one of the two big questions I would like to see answered in my lifetime. The other is the origin of life. The origin of life, I sort of know the kind of thing an answer might look like. In the case of consciousness, I don't even understand the question. It's baffling to me. You could imagine an animal that does a perfectly good job of surviving in very complicated ways, using just robotic technology, which it would work. Why do we need consciousness? What's it all about? I cannot answer your question.
Okay, we need to wrap this. We'll just take last two questions. Sorry, everybody.
Sorry.
I'd like to think that at some point in geological time that in humanity, religiosity will be eliminated in geological time.
But there's a moment when religiosity arose.
It goes away because
it goes away.
We use our prefrontal cortex and we use reasoning.
You hope it will go away in the future?
I hope that at some point in time, I think that would happen.
So do I. Yes.
Yeah. But given that currently in gene pools, diversity is actually, you want diversity. And in a gene pool, if you have a diverse groups of people, you would expect some people, some set, that would be religious, that would be prone to religiosity. Now, given those two premises, is it a fight worth fighting where you're trying to persuade those that are religious to become more reasonable? Is it a fight worth fighting? Meaning, should we publish books like Hitchens' God is Not Great or The God Delusion? Is it a fight worth fighting?
I'm not sure I got that. Are you saying diversity is a virtue and therefore it's a good thing to have?
No. In a group, in a diverse set of group, you would expect people that will be religious no matter what,
Yes.
and you cannot persuade them otherwise.
Yes, I think that's probably true, and the evidence supports that. Yeah.
Now, given that, is it worth trying to persuade them otherwise?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
That's why he writes those books. Last question, make it a good one. Last one. This is the last one, sir. Sorry. Last one.
Howdy. My name is Yomi. You say that all plants and animals have males and females, but that's not true for either. There are examples of asexual reproduction in both animals and plants. And while it is true that there are not intermediate gametes, sexual dimorphism describes a general clustering of traits, genetic, epigenetic, phenotypic, and importantly, behavioral characteristics. In regards to human behaviors, there are immense voids in the scientific understandings that underpin gender identity in the same way that we still struggle to understand sexuality. I think many of us would be surprised to hear you pathologize homosexuality or bisexuality. So I ask why you seem to pathologize or at least dismiss transgender folks, which have been present in all societies and are clearly just a result of human biodiversity.
I don't pathologize trans people. I admit there are people who have psychological gender dysphoria. I object to their announcing that they're of a different sex and thereby invading the spaces of other sexes, because it is sex, not gender.
Yes, I understand that, but in science, right, like we understand that the words that we use are generally just categories, right? Like biology isn't separate from chemistry. Chemistry isn't separate from physics. And when it comes to the male and the female, like these are words that we've used to generalize these two clusterings of categories, right? Like most males are taller than women, but if you see a short dude, short king out there, he's still a guy. He doesn't become a woman, and the same thing becomes...
As Michael said earlier, there are overlap between normal distributions. It's a trivial point.
It's not a trivial point when you consider that it's a clustering of many traits. So while there may be not a significant overlap between any given trait, there is a clustering of traits that exists. And one of those traits could also be self-identification, who you identify as you're growing up. That's in your brain, right? So like if it's a brain-related sexual dimorphism that is telling people who they are, who they identify with.
But should they be allowed to, should biological males be allowed to enter the boxing ring?
That's irrelevant to what I'm asking.
That's the only point I'm trying to make.
Okay, we need to wrap it up. This guy looks like he just has to get to the microphone.
Professor Dawkins, please, would you take my last question, please? Okay, so, I'm so happy. I can't imagine I'm talking to Dawkins, Sir, I've been reading you for the last 18 years, I was born and raised in Pakistan. I was Muslim. And, when I graduated from med school, I became an atheist for 1 year. And then I came back and I said, you know what? It doesn't give you a peace of mind. And when I read your book, God Delusion, I learned that I can live an atheist life in a very good way. So, sir, my question is, for us, you are a Moses.
There we go.
Sir, you are a Jesus for us. You are a Muhammad for us. But I have to say something. We were very heartbroken and we were very disappointed when we heard an interview I think you gave a few months ago on on some British,
This is the cultural Christian. Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
I better.
And sir, what you said was that you prefer Christianity over Islam. You said you want to have churches than mosques in London. You said that Christianity, that Islam is most misogynistic and bigot than in Islam. Sir, we were very disappointed. We young atheists were very heartbroken, sir. We wanted you to say that all the religions are shit.
All right. I'm happy to say that. Thank you very much. Okay,
sir,
I'm happy.
We have to cut it off.
That's the last question.
All right. Thank you, Richard Dawkins. Let's give him a round of applause. Here we go. All right. All right. Very good, sir. Thank you. Remember, if you're one of the VIP people, stay in your seats, and you can get your book signed afterwards. We'll be sitting out there. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.